Kyle Shanahan. I see a lot of people in the chat talking about, you got to fire Kyle, you got to fire Kyle. I've advocated for that. Let me explain why the Niners almost certainly will not fire Kyle Shanahan this year. You may have forgotten, but the Niners gave him an extension last year. I'm guessing it was I'm guessing he's under contract for like another 5 years. And as you know, head coach contracts are fully guaranteed unless you get fired for cause or something, which, how would that happen? So he's under contract. They just extended his deal. And usually head coach salaries are not public information. Well, this week, his salary info came out. He's the 10th highest paid head coach in North American professional sports. 10th highest paid, not just in the NFL. North American professional sports. He's number 10 out of Jim Harbaugh makes more money than him. Sean Payton makes more money than him. Andy Reid makes more money than him. But Kyle Shanahan makes $14 million a year. He's the highest paid coach who hasn't won a championship. Every coach who makes more than him has won at least one championship. Sean McVay, Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich. So $14 million a year for probably another 4 or 5 years. In no world will the Yorks pay Kyle Shanahan all that money for that long to not coach for their team. Now, if Shanahan were to get fired, he'd probably get hired somewhere else as a head coach. And if that team gives him $14 million a year, then the Niners are off the hook. They would just have to pay the difference. So if a team hired him for $12 million, they'd have to pay him $2 million a year. But that's going to be a big one. Paying him to not coach, I don't think they're going to do it. So maybe they should. What they could do is look into trading him. But I think most likely, unless something crazy happens, he's probably coming back next year. So let's talk about what the Niners need to do this offseason if they don't go for an entirely new head coach. Now, maybe they feel they could get Ben Johnson. Maybe they feel they could get Bill Belichick, and it's like an offer they can't pass up. Barring that, I think what would be realistic is that the Niners keep Kyle and bring in 3 new coordinators. 3. So Brian Schneider, special teams, gotta go. Nick Sorensen, defensive coordinator, gotta go. I mean, his group can't do anything without Nick Bosa. His group is Nick Bosa. He is clearly worse than Steve Wilks. He's a neophyte who isn't particularly good. He's learning on the job, and he gets out-coached routinely. Today was probably his rock bottom. It could get worse for Nick Sorensen. He's got to go. They got to get someone better than him. So that's 2 coordinators they got to replace. And then on offense, they need an offensive coordinator. I'm not saying strip Kyle Shanahan of play calling duties. I'm not saying that. There needs to be an offensive coordinator who helps Kyle Shanahan prepare, a brain that Kyle Shanahan can trust and depend on. In the past, he had Anthony Lynn, who wasn't an offensive coordinator, but was a former offensive coordinator, was an assistant head coach who could help Kyle Shanahan game plan, maybe pick the best players to put on the field. Kyle Shanahan is doing too much. He has too much responsibility. Andy Reid has an offensive coordinator. Andy Reid calls the plays, but Matt Nagy's the offensive coordinator. I think what the organization needs to tell Kyle is, look, dude, maybe not like that, but say, man, we're giving you one more chance. We're not firing you this year. This season was unacceptable. We're not going to bring back everyone and run it back. We need wholesale changes to the coaching staff. We want 3 new coordinators. And you got to hire an offensive coordinator for the first time. Got to do it. And I'm not talking about promoting Clay Kubiak. You need to bring in someone. It's not promoting Mick Lombardi. Sorry, Mick. You got to bring in someone because this is what happened to the Eagles last year. Eagles lost the Super Bowl. They brought in a bunch of new coordinators. It was like Sean Desai and someone else, and they were awful. And they went at 11-6, lost in the first round of the playoffs. Cleaned house. They didn't fire Nick Sirianni, but they brought in Kellen Moore, Vic Fangio, and boom, Philly's looking a little bit better. So I think the Niners need to do, barring a complete, firing Kyle, which you could argue that's the right thing to do. I don't think they'll do it. Barring that, you got to get him to have an offensive coordinator, 2 new coordinators, one on defense, one on special teams. Finally, an offensive coordinator for the first time under Kyle. And maybe a strong general manager too. You know, maybe someone other than Kyle and John Lynch, someone like a super Adam Peters to come in and have final say on these players on this roster. Because I don't think the Niners can just say, hey, you know, we had some bad luck and some injuries this year. We're gonna run it back. Same team next year. Everything's gonna be fine. No, everything's not gonna be fine. So if the Niners don't want to fire Kyle Shanahan, fine. Got to have 3 new coordinators next year. And if that doesn't work, then that's the end. I think that's generous and fair. Irvin Cruz says, it's time for change. You can go so far with the same players. They are stuck in the past. Oot Now says, Debo was gassed after the return got called back. RT-ish, I don't know. Says, don't look now, but 54 has been pedestrian, missed tackles, making business decisions perhaps, but check the stats after week 4. Old guard is done. Yeah. A. Breland says, F this team. Should not be all these penalties. Next man up should execute. Kyle, don't. Wow. Gobbs could have done better. Thank you, Grant. Well, we'll see. Jay Alvarez says, start Tanner. Maybe can trade Purdy if he's good. Jason Lutt says, who's Debo? All I see is Tyshawn these days. Whew. Dave Barkley says, G, difference in schmuck and schlemiel. Curious. I feel like there's a more negative connotation with schmuck, like a bad person, whereas a schlemiel is almost like a clown. You know, someone who embarrasses himself. Schmuck is someone who you don't like. I don't know. Have to ask my dad on that one. Chris Hamizi says, Kyle Shanahan is a good coach when given a great team. However, he's a bad, mediocre coach when he has an average, normal team. He's worn out his welcome in SF. Damn, Kyle. Bob Osoe says, funny how Kyle was so quick to throw the defense under the bus in the presser. What about your bonehead play calling empty backfield on 4th and 2? Yeah, he really went quick to the defense, didn't he? Daryl Hicks says, Dante Pearsall or Ricky Pettis? I'm not even going to knock Ricky Pearsall. He doesn't get the ball. He could be the next Jordan Mason. Kyle protecting his boy who can't throw a wet ball. Yikes. Dave Barkley says, could a young quarterback's parents sue a coach for malpractice? No. Crazy Rod 16 says something I don't understand. How do you go on the field without the right proper cleats? Example, Brandon Allen. Is that what he did? I mean, he hasn't played in 3 years. Petty AF says, I'm sick of Kyle. He needed to go. He's horrible at calling plays and using his personnel. Spider 369 says, sign Jones, bench Debo, CMC, let Mason, Cowing play. Petty AF says, I hate when people say Kyle would get hired immediately. You know who else got hired immediately? Chip Kelly. How'd that work out? It's true. Dave Barclay says, done saying fire Lyle. I've said it thousands of times while paying to say it. Niners lost my money 3 years ago and lost my respect this year. Worst owner in the NFL? Maybe. I said fire sale, and they should have. The Yorks are already paying Kyle Shanahan not to coach, says Carson. Lauren Crampsey says, what a mess. Petty AF says, players are old and slow. Kyle is predictable. Yikes. Now, I understand there's a lot of emotion after a loss, and maybe some of you guys won't feel so upset with Kyle afterwards, but I feel like Niner fans are more upset with Kyle Shanahan than they've ever been, and that he's doing nothing to change their minds. Every week, he doubles down on the same bad stuff he's been doing all year. And I think as he shows his stubbornness, and as he's so reluctant to make obvious adjustments that anyone would suggest, do think he's losing some goodwill, confidence. Might even be losing his own team. Don't you think some of the players are wondering, like, hey, why does our offense go through Christian McCaffrey all of a sudden? We were doing just fine on offense without him. Now he's back, and God love him, he's not quite ready to carry the load or the ball. So why are we doing this? What is the deal? If you can't trust your coach to put the best players on the field and feature them, feature the ones who've earned it, then where's the drive? I mean, at what point are they going to pack it in? And the ones who have already, can you blame them? What has Kyle Shanahan done this year to give the team credit that he can turn this around? You think he'll have the epiphany next week that Jordan Mason actually deserves to be on the field? I don't think so. Could have had Zach Frazier and Dave Merritt. Dave Merritt would have been pretty good as a defensive coordinator. Joseph Friel says, lock in Debo, anyone, CMC, someone, keep up the best underrated QC work. All right, guys, it's 9:15 in Green Bay. I got to drive. It's 3 hours back to Chicago, sleep, get up early, and go home. I don't really have a whole lot more to say. They lost by 28. They couldn't even get their best players on the field. They played a quarterback with a broken finger. This 2024 49ers team is got to be one of the more maybe the most frustrating team I've ever covered. I mean, maybe they turn it around and go on a run, but they probably won't. And if they miss the playoffs, you're going to look back at this team as a team that had so much more potential than it actually delivered on. Yeah, they had some bad luck and some injuries, sure. But they also underperformed more than any team on the Niners has in a very long time. And they got to figure out why. Like last year, the Eagles went through a Super Bowl hangover. Things didn't go so well from them. They still went 11-6. This team isn't going 11-6. This Super Bowl hangover is way worse than the Eagles was. Because if the Niners went 11-6 this year and lost in the first round of the playoffs, people would be really upset. But that's not going to happen this year. They're not making it to 11-6. So how do they explain such an awful, this team was in the Super Bowl this year. How do they explain such a collapse? How do they give the team and the fans hope next year? You tell me. Is keeping Kyle and bringing in 3 new coordinators enough? You tell me.